Captain Kim Tae-ho rubbed his tired eyes and looked at the console screen again. The numbers were still there, glowing green against the black display. After 15 years of deep space exploration, he had never seen readings like these. His coffee had gone cold hours ago, but he couldn't tear himself away from the impossible data streaming across his monitor. The research vessel, Harmony, floated silently in the void between stars, its massive sensor arrays scanning the darkness for signs of life. For 3 months they had found nothing but empty space and dead rocks. Then this signal appeared from nowhere, pulsing with a rhythm that seemed almost like a heartbeat. "Captain, you need to see this," Dr. Park So-jin whispered, her breath warm against his ear as she leaned over his shoulder. Her fingers traced the wave patterns on the screen, and Tae-ho could smell the faint scent of her lavender shampoo, mixed with the metallic air of the ship's recycling systems. The signal was coming from Kepler 442b, a planet that had been silent for 300 years. The old records showed it once hosted an advanced civilization that suddenly vanished without explanation. No distress calls, no wars, no natural disasters. One day they were there, broadcasting their culture across the galaxy, and the next day their world went dark. "These patterns are incredible," So-jin continued, her voice filled with excitement. "Look at this mathematical sequence embedded in the transmission. It's using prime numbers as a base, but the complexity goes beyond anything we've seen from known civilizations." Communications Officer Lee Min-ho spun around in his chair, his young face bright with curiosity. "Captain, I've run the signal through every natural phenomenon database we have. This is definitely artificial. Someone or something is trying to communicate with us." The bridge of the Harmony hummed with nervous energy. The ship's AI systems chattered softly as they processed the incoming data, while the main engines rumbled deep in the vessel's belly. Through the massive viewing ports, distant stars twinkled like diamonds scattered on black velvet. Engineer Choi Yuna's voice crackled over the intercom from the engine room. "Captain, I'm bringing the faster-than-light drive online. If we're going to investigate this signal, we need to be ready for anything. The quantum engines are showing green across the board." Tae-ho made his decision. "Plot a course for Kepler 442b. We're going to find out what's sending that signal." The journey through hyperspace took 6 hours. The Harmony emerged from the swirling blue vortex of faster-than-light travel to find a brown and grey world spinning slowly around its dying star. The planet looked dead from space, with no signs of the great cities that once covered its surface. "Scanning now," Min-ho announced, his fingers dancing across his control panel. "I'm detecting massive structures beneath the surface. The underground. Cities are still intact, but I'm reading no life signs anywhere." As they descended through the thin atmosphere, the true scope of the alien civilization became clear. Enormous underground chambers stretched for miles beneath the planet's crust, connected by tunnels that could have housed entire fleets of human ships. The architecture was beautiful, but alien, with flowing curves and crystalline structures that seemed to grow from the rock itself. "The signal is getting stronger," So-jin reported, her equipment humming as it processed the alien language. "It's coming from the deepest part of the planetary core. The transmission is incredibly powerful to reach us from that depth." Tae-ho guided the Harmony into a massive cavern that had once been the aliens' main spaceport. Their landing lights illuminated strange vehicles that looked more like living creatures than machines, with smooth organic curves and surfaces that seemed to shimmer in the artificial light. "Captain, these preservation systems are still active," Yuna called out as she examined the alien technology. "Whatever happened here, they had time to prepare. The entire city is in perfect condition, like they just stepped out for a moment." The crew put on their environmental suits and ventured into the silent city. The streets were wide and clean, with buildings that reached up toward the cavern ceiling like frozen waterfalls. Strange symbols covered every surface, glowing softly with their own inner light. "The signal is definitely a message," So-jin confirmed as they walked deeper into the city. "It's been repeating the same pattern for centuries, waiting for someone with the right technology to receive it. But why us? Why now?" At the city's center, they found a massive crystalline structure that pulsed with the same rhythm as the signal. The crystal was warm to the touch, and when Tae-ho placed his hand on its surface, Images flashed through his mind. He saw the alien civilization at its height, millions of beings living in harmony beneath the planet's surface. Then he saw the darkness coming and understood why the message had waited so long for humanity to find it. Dr. Park So-jin's hands trembled as the alien symbols on her translation device began forming words in Korean, then English. The crystal chamber around them pulsed with an eerie blue light, and the ancient message finally revealed its terrible secret. What she read made her blood run cold. "Captain," she whispered, her voice barely audible in the vast underground hall. "This isn't a greeting, it's a warning." The translated text scrolled across her portable screen like a nightmare coming to life. The Kepler civilization hadn't been destroyed by war or natural disaster. Something far worse had found them, an ancient hunger that moved between the stars, feeding on the very essence of consciousness itself. Captain Kim Tae-ho moved closer, reading over her shoulder as the horrifying truth unfolded. The entity had swept through the Kepler system like a plague of darkness, draining the minds of every living being. Not killing them, but something worse, leaving their bodies alive but empty, walking shells with no thoughts, no dreams, no awareness. "Look at these star charts," So-jin said, her finger tracing a path across the holographic display that materialized from the crystal. The entity moves in a pattern, consuming entire civilizations. It's been doing this for millions of years, and now it's heading toward our galaxy. The alien maps showed the creature's path of destruction, stretching back through time. Dozens of civilizations had fallen to its hunger, their worlds left populated by mindless husks that eventually starved to death without the consciousness to feed themselves. Engineer Choi Yuna's voice crackled through their comm units from the ship above. "Captain, I'm detecting massive energy readings from the planet's core. Whatever you found down there is drawing power from the planetary rotation itself." The crystal pulsed brighter, and suddenly the chamber filled with holographic images. The crew watched in horror as the final days of the Kepler civilization played out before their eyes. Millions of aliens, tall and graceful with 4 arms and silver skin, collapsed one by one as the invisible entity swept through their cities. "They tried to fight it," So-jin translated, watching the desperate final battle. "Look, they built massive shields around their cities, deployed weapons that could destroy planets, but nothing worked. The entity doesn't attack the body, it feeds on consciousness itself." Communications Officer Lee Min-ho's excited voice interrupted. "From the ship. Captain, I'm picking up movement on the long-range sensors. Something big is heading toward our galaxy. Still light years away, but definitely artificial. The readings match what you're describing down there." Tae-ho felt his stomach drop. The entity was real, and it was coming. The alien message continued to unfold, revealing the desperate final plan of the Kepler people. In their last months, their greatest scientists had worked around the clock to develop a weapon that could fight pure consciousness. They called it a consciousness shield, quantum field that could protect thinking minds from the entity's hunger. "This is incredible," So-jin breathed, her translation software working overtime to process the complex technical data. They actually figured out how to shield consciousness itself. But look at this requirement. The shield needs a specific type of neural resonance to power it. The technical specifications were mind-boggling. The consciousness shield required brainwaves that oscillated at a precise quantum frequency, something that occurred naturally in only one known species. The Kepler people had tested their own neural patterns, along with samples from dozens of other civilizations they had contacted over the centuries. None of them had the right frequency. "Wait," Tae-ho said, studying the neural pattern displayed in the hologram. "That looks familiar." Yuna's voice came through their comms again, this time filled with excitement. "Captain, I'm reading human neural patterns from the ship's medical bay, and they match something in the alien database. The computer is going crazy with correlation alerts." The truth hit them like a lightning bolt. The specific quantum resonance needed to power the consciousness shield occurred naturally in human brainwaves. Not all humans, but enough of them, to create a defensive network capable of protecting entire star systems. That's why the message waited, So-jin realized, her voice filled with awe. The Kepler people knew they couldn't use their own technology. They were waiting for us, for humanity to find it. The chamber around them seemed to respond to their understanding. New holograms appeared, showing how the consciousness shield would work. Humans would need to link their minds together, creating a quantum network powered by their unique neural frequency. The process would be dangerous. Extended use could burn out a person's consciousness permanently, but it was their only hope. The final part of the message revealed the entity's current location and trajectory. It had consumed 3 more civilizations since leaving Kepler 442b, growing stronger with each feeding. At its current pace, it would reach Earth's galaxy within 50 years. 50 years to prepare for a battle against something that had never been defeated, using technology that required humanity to risk their very souls to operate. As they prepared to leave the dead world, Taeho looked back at the crystal chamber one last time. The Kepler people had sacrificed everything to give humanity this chance. Now it was up to them to make sure that sacrifice wasn't in vain. The massive Galactic Council chamber on Centauri Prime buzzed with tension as Captain Kim Taeho finished presenting his findings. Representatives from 47 different species sat in floating pods arranged in a perfect circle, their various forms creating a rainbow of alien biology. The Zephyrian ambassador, a tall blue creature with tentacles for arms, was the first to speak. "Captain Kim, your species has always been known for wild imagination," the ambassador said, his voice carrying the arrogant tone that had made humans unwelcome in many galactic circles. "This consciousness-eating entity you describe sounds like something from a human horror story." Ambassador Velkana from the Arcturus system laughed, a sound like grinding metal. Her crystalline body sparkled as she spoke. "Humans and their chaotic neural patterns. Your brains fire randomly, creating noise instead of organized thought. How could such primitive minds possibly power advanced technology?" Dr. Park So-jin stood beside Taeho, her jaw clenched with frustration. She had spent weeks preparing the presentation, translating every piece of Kepler technology into formats these aliens could understand. Yet they dismissed her work without even reviewing the data. "With respect, Ambassador Velkana," So-jin said, her voice steady despite her anger. "Your own species' neural patterns are too organized, too predictable. The consciousness shield requires quantum chaos, something only human minds can generate naturally." The council chamber erupted in clicks, whistles and electronic sounds as the various species communicated their displeasure. To them, humans were barely evolved apes who had stumbled into space travel through luck rather than intelligence. Then the emergency alarms began blaring. Communications Officer Lee Min-ho burst into the chamber, his face pale with terror. "Captain, the long-range sensors have confirmed it. The entity just consumed the Vega system. 12 billion Vegans are gone. Their worlds are still there, but every consciousness has been drained." The chamber fell silent. The Vegan civilization was one of the oldest in the galaxy, masters of mental disciplines that had lasted for millions of years. If they couldn't resist the entity, what hope did anyone else have? Admiral Keth Vox, the Galactic Council's military commander, activated the main display. The holographic image showed the Vega system, but something was wrong. The planets still orbited their star, but they were dark, lifeless. No energy signatures, no communications, nothing. "The entity leaves no trace," Admiral Keth Vox said, his reptilian features grim. "It doesn't destroy technology or infrastructure. It simply takes the consciousness and moves on. The Vegans' bodies are still there, but their minds are gone." Captain Taeho seized the moment. "This is exactly what happened to the Kepler civilization. The entity is real, and it's heading for Earth next. We have maybe 30 years to prepare." The mood in the chamber shifted completely. Suddenly, the human presentation didn't seem so far-fetched. Species that had dismissed humanity for centuries were now looking at them with desperate hope. "Show us this consciousness shield technology," Admiral Keth Vox commanded. The journey back to Earth took 3 weeks aboard the fastest ship in the human fleet. Engineer Choi Yuna worked around the clock during the trip, designing the massive generators that would be needed to power the shield network. The alien technology was incredibly complex, requiring materials that didn't exist naturally and construction techniques that pushed human engineering to its limits. We'll need to build them in space, Yuna explained to the emergency council that had gathered in Earth's orbital station. The generators have to be positioned at specific points around the solar system to create an effective grid. Dr. Park stood before the assembly of Earth's greatest minds, scientists, engineers, philosophers, and military leaders. The weight of the galaxy's survival rested on her shoulders as she explained the terrible cost of their defense. The consciousness shield requires human volunteers to maintain the neural connection, she said, her voice heavy with the implications. The process will link their minds directly to the quantum field. Extended exposure could permanently damage or destroy their consciousness. The room fell silent as the reality sank in. They were asking people to sacrifice their very souls to save the galaxy. How many volunteers do we need? Asked Dr. Yoon Haijin, Earth's leading neuroscientist. At least 10,000, Park replied. Maybe more depending on how strong the entity is when it arrives. Within hours of the announcement, the volunteer applications began pouring in. Soldiers, scientists, teachers, students, artists, people from every walk of life stepped forward to offer their minds for the greater good. The response was overwhelming, with over 1 million people volunteering within the first week. Construction of the consciousness shield generators began immediately. Massive space stations took shape around Earth, Mars, and the outer planets. The technology was unlike anything humans had ever built. Crystalline structures that hummed with quantum energy, connected by invisible threads of consciousness. Dr. Park was among the first to test the neural connection. She lay in the specially designed chamber, electrodes attached to her skull, as the machine synchronized with her brainwaves. The sensation was indescribable, like having her thoughts expanded across the cosmos, touching minds she had never met but somehow understood. The connection is stable, she reported, her voice strange and distant. I can feel the other volunteers joining the network. Our minds are becoming one. As more volunteers connected to the grid, the shield began to take shape. It was invisible to normal sensors, but those connected to the network could see it. A shimmering barrier of pure consciousness that surrounded the solar system like a protective embrace. The entity was still years away, but humanity was ready to make the ultimate sacrifice to protect not just Earth, but every thinking being in the galaxy. The darkness came without warning, rolling through space like a tsunami of nothingness. Captain Kim Tae-ho watched from the command center as the entity devoured the outer rim of the Centauri system. One moment the planets were there, spinning peacefully around their stars, with billions of lives going about their daily routines. The next moment, silence. Captain, the entity just reached Alpha Centauri, Communications Officer Lee Min-ho reported, his voice tight with fear. All communications from the system have stopped. The planets are still there, but... He paused, struggling to find words for the horror they were witnessing. The main display showed the Centauri worlds continuing their orbital dance, but they were wrong somehow, dark, empty. Like beautiful paintings with all the life sucked out of them. The entity left no destruction in its wake. It simply took what made life worth living and moved on. How long until it reaches our outer colonies? Tae-ho asked, though he already knew the answer would be measured in hours, not days. 6 hours to Pluto Station, Min-ho replied. The entity is moving faster than we calculated. It's like it can smell us from across the galaxy. In the consciousness shield chambers scattered throughout the solar system, 10,000 human volunteers lay connected to the quantum network. Dr. Park So-jin was among them, her brilliant mind now part of something larger than herself. Through the neural link, she could feel every other volunteer, their fears, their determination, their willingness to die for people they would never meet. The volunteers came from every corner of human space. There was Kim Dong-soo, a farmer, from Mars who had volunteered to protect his children's future. Park Mi-young, a teacher from Europa Station, who wanted her students to grow up in a universe where consciousness could flourish. Lee Jae-woo, a retired soldier who had spent his life protecting Earth and now faced the ultimate battle. Shield. Generators are at full power, Engineer Choi Yuna reported from the primary control station. Her hands flew across the control panels as she monitored the massive crystalline structures floating throughout the solar system. All volunteers are connected and stable. We're as ready as we'll ever be. The entity reached Pluto Station exactly 6 hours later. The mining colony had been evacuated, but the automated systems were still running when the darkness swept over them. For a moment, the mechanical systems continued to function. Then they too fell silent as the entity consumed even the artificial intelligence that ran them. "Contact with Pluto Station lost," Minho announced unnecessarily. Everyone in the command center could see the station's lights go dark on the tactical display. "Activate the consciousness shield," Tejo ordered, his voice steady despite the terror in his heart. The effect was immediate and spectacular. A barrier of pure thought materialized around the inner solar system, invisible to normal sensors, but blazing like a star to anyone connected to the neural network. The shield pulsed with the combined willpower of 10,000 human minds, their chaotic neural patterns creating a quantum frequency that had never existed before in the galaxy. The entity struck the barrier like a hammer hitting diamond. For the first time in millions of years, something resisted its hunger. The force of the impact sent shockwaves through space, causing auroras to dance across every planet in the system. "Shield holding at 97%, Yuna reported, but her voice carried a note of concern. "The volunteers are taking massive neural strain. Their brainwave patterns are going crazy." In the shield chambers, the connected humans began to convulse as the entity pressed against their minds. Dr. Park felt the alien hunger trying to drain her consciousness, like ice-cold fingers reaching into her soul. But she held on, drawing strength from the thousands of other minds linked to hers. Through the network, she could sense the entity's confusion. This was not how its feeding was supposed to work. For eons, it had consumed consciousness with ease, draining entire civilizations in moments. But human minds were different, chaotic, unpredictable, refusing to follow the patterns the entity expected. "Captain, we're losing people," Yuna called out as warning lights flashed across her control panels. "Neural burnout in chambers 7, 12 and 23. The volunteers' minds can't handle this level of exposure much longer, but even as some volunteers fell unconscious, their minds overwhelmed by the strain, others stepped forward. The backup volunteers, those who had been waiting for their chance to join the fight, connected to the network without hesitation. The entity pressed harder, pouring more of its ancient power against the shield. It had never encountered resistance. Like this, and for the first time in its existence, it felt something new: frustration. These strange creatures were not just resisting its hunger, they were actively fighting back. "The shield is doing something incredible," Park's voice came through the comm system, distorted by her connection to the quantum network. "It's not just blocking the entity, it's learning from it. Our chaotic neural patterns are creating feedback, loops that the entity can't process." Captain Tejo watched in amazement as the consciousness shield began to pulse with increasing intensity. Instead of weakening under the entity's assault, it was growing stronger. The combined willpower of humanity, channeled through alien technology, was creating something the universe had never seen before. "Push the generators to maximum output," Tejo ordered. "Override all safety protocols." Yuna's fingers danced across her controls, pushing the crystalline generators beyond their designed limits. The structures began to glow white-hot, but they held together, sustained by the sheer determination of the minds connected to them. The shield suddenly flared brighter than a star, and for one impossible moment it began to push back against the entity. The ancient hunger that had devoured countless civilizations found itself facing something it could not understand or consume: the chaotic, beautiful, utterly unpredictable consciousness of humanity. The battle for the galaxy had begun, and for the first time in eons the darkness was retreating. The moment the ancient entity began to retreat, every sensor in the solar system registered the change. Captain Kim Tae-ho watched in stunned silence as the wave of darkness that had consumed countless civilizations suddenly pulled back, fleeing from Earth's consciousness shield like a predator confronted by something larger and more dangerous than itself. "It's working," Communications Officer Lee Min-ho whispered, his voice filled with disbelief. "The entity is actually retreating. In all the historical records, nothing has ever made it back down before. The consciousness shield blazed around. The solar system like a crown of pure thought, its quantum frequencies pulsing with the combined willpower of 10,000 human minds. But the victory came at a terrible cost. In the shield chambers throughout human space, volunteers began collapsing as their neural systems overloaded from the massive strain. Dr. Park So-jin felt the entity's retreat through her connection to the quantum network. The alien hunger that had pressed against her mind like ice-cold claws was pulling away, confused and defeated by something it could not understand. But the battle had changed her. Her consciousness had been expanded, touched by quantum forces that no human mind was meant to experience. "Beginning shield power down sequence," Engineer Choi Yuna announced, her hands trembling as she worked the controls. "Medical teams to all consciousness chambers immediately. We have massive neural trauma across the network." As the shield generators slowly reduced their output, the volunteers began disconnecting from the quantum field one by one. Some emerged from their chambers, tired but intact, their minds forever marked by the experience of touching something beyond human understanding. Others were not so fortunate. In Chamber 17, volunteer Kim Dong-soo, the Mars farmer who had joined to protect his children's future, lay motionless on his connection bed. His body was alive, breathing steadily, but his eyes stared at nothing. The neural readouts showed the devastating truth. His consciousness had been completely burned out by the strain of channeling quantum energy through his human mind. He was not alone. Nearly 3,000 volunteers had sacrificed their consciousness, permanently their minds forever lost to save the galaxy. They lived, but they were empty shells, cared for by medical staff who treated them with the reverence reserved for the greatest heroes in human history. Dr. Park emerged from her chamber changed but alive. Her mind buzzed with new understanding, quantum equations and cosmic insights that would take years to fully comprehend. She had touched the fundamental forces of consciousness itself and returned with knowledge that would advance human science by centuries. "The entity," she said, her voice different somehow, deeper and more resonant than before. "It wasn't evil in the way we understand evil. It was just hungry, following an instinct older than our galaxy. But it had never encountered minds like ours, chaotic, selfless, willing to sacrifice individual consciousness for the greater good." The news of humanity's victory spread through the galaxy faster than light itself. Species that had dismissed humans as primitive barbarians now looked upon them with awe and respect. The Galactic Council, which had barely tolerated human membership, suddenly found itself sending urgent messages to Earth. Admiral Kethvox arrived at Earth 3 weeks after the battle, leading a fleet of ships from dozens of different species. The reptilian commander, who had once considered humans unworthy of military command, now stood before Captain Teho with something approaching reverence. "Captain Kim," the Admiral said, his voice carrying formal respect that had never been there before. "The Galactic Council has voted unanimously to offer you command of the new Galactic Defense Force. Your species has proven that true strength comes not from technology or firepower, but from the willingness to sacrifice for others." The ceremony on Centauri Prime was unlike anything in galactic history. Representatives from every known species gathered to witness humanity's official recognition as the protector race of the galaxy. Ambassador Velkana, the crystalline being, who had once mocked human neural patterns as chaotic and primitive, now spoke with tears in her multifaceted eyes. "We were wrong about your species," she admitted before the assembled council. "Your chaotic minds, which we saw as weakness, were actually your greatest strength. You think with your hearts as much as your heads, and that made you capable of something we thought impossible, defeating pure hunger with pure love." Engineer Choi Yuna found herself at the center of a galactic revolution in consciousness technology. Species from across the galaxy sent their brightest scientists to learn from her, hoping to build their own consciousness shields. But as they quickly discovered, the technology required something that could not be taught or replicated: the uniquely human ability to sacrifice individual consciousness for collective survival. "The neural patterns are the easy part," Yunar explained to a gathering of alien scientists. Any species with sufficient technology can build the generators and create the quantum fields. But powering the shield requires something special. Minds that can think beyond themselves, that can choose to die for people they will never meet. Years passed, and humanity's role in the galaxy transformed completely. No longer the newcomers struggling for acceptance, humans became the guardians that other species looked to for protection. Human colonies spread throughout the galaxy, not as conquerors but as protectors, establishing consciousness shield networks around vulnerable worlds. The volunteers who had sacrificed their minds became living monuments to human courage. Special facilities were built to care for them, and their families were honored as the relatives of galactic heroes. Children throughout human space learned their names and stories, understanding that these ordinary people had done something extraordinary. Dr. Park established the Institute for Consciousness Studies, using her quantum-expanded mind to push the boundaries of what was possible. Her research led to breakthroughs in neural science, quantum physics, and the fundamental nature of consciousness itself. Captain Tae Ho, now Admiral of the Galactic Defense Force, often stood on the bridge of his flagship and looked out at the stars. The galaxy was safe, protected by networks of consciousness shields powered by human volunteers who understood that some things were worth any sacrifice. The Kepler civilization's final message had been proven correct. Humanity was special, not because they were stronger or smarter than other species, but because they possessed something rarer than any element in the universe, the courage to give everything for the greater good. In a galaxy filled with wonders and terrors, humanity had found their purpose. They were the guardians of consciousness itself, the defenders of every thinking mind among the stars. The Thumb 1.